Welcome to part 5 of this series on working with SIPO's trademark XML data. I showed this slide in parts 3 and 4 of this series. The demo I'm about to do involves the pieces within the dashed rectangle on the right. In the green rectangle at the top, we have a so-called OLAP cube, which I've built off my multidimensional data warehouse using Microsoft SQL Server Analysis Services. OLAP stands for Online Analytical Processing. It's commonly used in business intelligence applications. In the blue rectangle at the bottom, we have something I've labeled MDX queries to indicate that it queries the cube to get information. MDX stands for multidimensional expressions. It can be a bit difficult to get your head around some multidimensional expressions. Just try visualizing something in, say, 9 dimensions. So we use a special tool called a cube browser to create our MDX expressions and interpret the results. I'll be using Microsoft Excel as my cube browser. The cube is the so-called back end, and the Microsoft Excel part is referred to as the front end. This is a common setup in business intelligence applications involving cubes. Here is my Microsoft Excel front end. It's running under Windows 10 on my desktop PC. My cube backend is running under Windows Server on a virtual machine elsewhere on my local area network. I'm using a large monitor. From time to time, I'll zoom in to try to give you a better look at what's going on. Zooming in and out can get a bit clunky though, so please bear with me. If you watched the demo in part 4 of this series, you'll recall I said that the user didn't need to know anything about the underlying database structure. Well, it's not that simple if you're dealing with a cube. To work with a cube, you need to understand the so-called measures and dimensions in the cube. In part 3 of this series, I gave a brief introduction to dimensions, but it's easier to understand both measures and dimensions by way of some examples. So let's get on with the demo. Here we have our so-called measures. The sigma symbols identify the various measures. And below the measures, we have our dimensions. I'll scroll down a bit, get into the dimensions section, expand it again so you can see there's an abandoned date dimension, there's an agent dimension, there's a claim type dimension, there's something called a document dimension. I'll scroll down a little further, expand that. Here's a filing date dimension, a geographical indication dimension, a language dimension, a legislation dimension, and so on. The idea is that you always need to have at least one measure, and in this particular cube, the measure that I'll be using most often is this number of trademarks one. Watch what happens over on the left when I click that measure. Expand the screen again. You can see this number, 1,698,954. That is the total number of marks for which information is represented in this cube. Now, that number is not very interesting by itself, but let's add a dimension. I'll scroll down and add that language dimension. Here it is here. I'll click it, expand again. you can see we immediately get a breakdown showing the number of marks filed in English versus those filed in French. You'll notice there's 15, let's call them outliers. These are cases for which SIPO's XML data does not indicate the language. So I'll just uncheck those and we won't worry about them for now. Let's try adding another dimension. I'll just add the legislation dimension here by clicking on it. Now we get, within our language breakdown, a further breakdown showing not just how many cases were filed in English, but also showing how many of those were filed pursuant to each of the statutes that you see listed here. Now, I can expand each of those, of course, in order to find out exactly what those various statutes are. I'll just expand a few of them. You probably recognize most, if not all of them. Here they are. Now, let's add another dimension. This time I'll bring in mark class. Now we get, within our language legislation breakdown, a further breakdown according to mark class. And you can see what's meant by mark class. For example, under Trademarks Act here, we've got all of these classes: certification mark, distinguishing guise, geographical indication, etc. Under the old Trademark and Design Act, in contrast, we only have these marks, which were classes under that particular statute. Similarly, under the old Unfair Competition Act, we had distinguishing guises, standardization marks, and trademarks. Let's bring in another dimension. I'll bring in mark status, SIPO. Now you can see, looking, for example, under the certification mark section here, we have a further breakdown, again numerical, showing all of, the marks broken down by status. Now I'll scroll up and drop in the agent dimension. In this case, I'm dropping in an agent hierarchy that lets me drill down from province to city to agent. Now, as you can see, things are getting a little busy here, so I'll move that agent dimension up onto this so-called filter. Now, right now we're looking at all provinces, but maybe we just want to look at one agent. To do that, I'll just go up to the filter here, and here we have all agents by province and city. If I click this, I can see all of the provinces. You'll notice some provinces are listed twice, Quebec and Quebec. That's because of the way in which agent addresses are presented in both languages in some filings. Let's focus in on, say, Alberta. I'll deselect everything, open up Alberta, expand this a bit, have a look at Calgary, and how about Bennett Jones? Click them. Immediately the display is reconfigured to show the language legislation mark class breakdown for this firm. But this is showing us all of their filings over all time. Maybe you're only interested in what they filed last year. Well, that's easy. I can just bring in one of several date dimensions. Let's try this filing date calendar date dimension. It put it on the columns, but I'll just move it down to the rows for starters. And you can see the calendar year breakdown. That's not really very convenient though, so let's move the filing date dimension up to the filter. Expand that a bit so that you can see what's going on. So now we can see we've got a single agent, Bennett Jones, out of Calgary selected, and we have another filter item available to us. We can filter on filing date by the calendar year. So I will open up that filter. I want to look at multiple items potentially. I will deselect everything. I will scroll down and we'll just pick 2019. I could, you'll notice, if I wanted to, drill down even further by quarter, by month, by date within specific month, but let's just leave it at all of 2019 for now. Here we are. That's not a very extensive sample, so let's just go back and add in a few more years, about 2018, 2017, 2016. That looks a bit more interesting. SIPO's XML data files contain many dates: filing dates, registration dates, publication dates, abandonment dates, expiry dates, and many, many more. As you saw here, I'm using the filing date dimension. Well, I wonder who the trademark owners might be. To find that out, I can bring in yet another dimension. How about our owner by nationality hierarchy from the trademark owner dimension? I'll just click that, and here they are. Now, we might want to rearrange things here. I'll move owner by nationality up to the top so we get a breakdown by country that is a little more easy to read. You'll notice that as soon as I drop in any of these dimensions, the results are presented instantaneously. That's because everything in the cube has been pre-computed, and that's the point of having a cube. You can very quickly get the information, and you can move it around too. I can, for example, take the mark class and put that up under nationality, and so it's rearranged there. Maybe I'll get rid of language, get rid of legislation, and here we have just the breakdown there. If I wanted to, I could drill down within any of these, for example, picking China, and there are the clients from China for which they did the filings that are represented for the filing date years that I selected. They've got one I see from the Isle of Man, and so on. Okay, let's try something else. I'll just clear away all of my dimension choices and clear everything out of the filter. Start with a clean slate. Again, we've got the number of trademarks measure. Then from the agent dimension, I'll scroll back up to find it. There it is. I'll choose agent name with city. Here they all are. And they're in alphabetical order. I can just scroll through the list. Whoops. To the bottom. And here you can see that familiar number, 1,698,954, that being the total number of marks represented in the cube. and the numbers in the column above it being the number of marks for which each of the indicated agents are the agents of record. Of course, you don't so much care about alphabetical order. You'd probably rather see some numerical ranking, so I'll just click sort that largest to smallest, and you can see that marks for which there is no agent come out as number 1, Bereskin and Parr in Toronto at number 2, and so on. Just expand that a bit so that you can see the rankings there. Again, you can drop in date dimensions in order to focus on, for example, filings from just a particular calendar year or group of years, as I showed a moment ago. Let's try something else. I'll get rid of the agent dimension there. Let's bring back that language dimension. There it is. We'll bring back also the filing date dimension, calendar. We've got that on our rows. I'm going to choose, we've got that on our columns. I'm going to open up the calendar year dimension, and let's choose a few more years. Let's take it right back to 2010. So there we are with the breakdown. Now, we've got the breakdown here, as you can see, by language, I could move the language over to the columns, and that might make a little more sense. Now let's bring in a chart. Here we are. I'll just accept the default chart, and right away we get a chart showing the breakdown for calendar years 2010 through 2019 of filings in Canada's 2 official languages. I'll get rid of the language description, so we'll just have the filings themselves. We can now bring in something called a slicer. I can find my slicers. Here we are. Now scroll down and choose owner nationality. Right here. I'll expand that, make it easier for you to see. So I'm picking owner nationality as my so-called slicer. It takes it a moment to set up the slicer for me, but what you are going to see is a list of countries, trademark owner nationalities. It won't be every single country in the world. It'll just be countries that are represented in the cube. Here we are. I'll just move the graph over a bit and move the owner nationality up. I'll expand that a bit so you can see. Alphabetically ordered list. Now, watch what happens when I click one of these countries. I'll click Argentina, and right away everything gets reconfigured to show just filings by trademark owners having Argentinian nationality. Let's try Australia. there you go. You'll notice the chart, including its axes, is reconfigured along with the numbers in the spreadsheet on the immediate left. Try Austria. I can come down. Here's Canada. And so you get the idea there. Now, let's see if we can bring in another slicer. Insert slicer. There it is. Go back again to owner nationality. And this time, let's pick province. You can find it. Here we are. So now we've got a slicer focusing on Canadian provinces. So same thing. Let's try Alberta. There are the filings from Alberta in calendar years 2010 through 2019. British Columbia. We see British Columbia in French here. That's because there were a few filings for which the address information was presented in French. Same thing for a few filings in Prince Edward Island presented in French. Here are the Manitoba filings. Let's have a look at Ontario. Again, you'll notice the vertical axis on the graph reconfiguring. Here's Quebec and Quebec, Saskatchewan. So you get the idea. I'll just remove the chart. Now, let's try something else. I'll go back over to my dimensions and we'll scroll down and find owner by nationality. Bring it in here. Now, you'll notice it only says Canada. That's because we had selected Canada previously via that slicer. I'll move owner by nationality to the filter, and I'll open up the filter, and let's, instead of Canada, I'll deselect everything first. Then let's have a look at South Korea. Here's South Korea. If I expand it, I see all of the trademark owners having South Korean nationality. I'll scroll down here and let's look at LG Electronics. There they are. I'll just expand that. Now, I may have to scroll down again, but you can see that there are a number of LG Electronics entities. Why do we see so many occurrences of what appears to be the same entity? Well, the answer is twofold at least. You can see in some cases we've got parenthetic expressions included in the identification of the trademark owner. So in one case, we have a corporation of the Republic of Korea. In another case, I see a Korean corporation, so on and so forth. That's one reason. A second reason is that some of these may have been presented with different addresses. And in database terms, that's a different entity. But what I want to do is select all of those LG Electronics, and I will select all of the LG Electronics entities. That appears to be all of them. So now we're doing a study, shall we say, on Canadian trademark filings in calendar years 2010 through 2019 by that particular entity. And we can drill down, for example, let's have a look. I can drill down by calendar year to calendar quarter. I can go further. And here we have specific filings by date. You might wonder, well, why am I only seeing 2 dates? Why am I only seeing 2 dates in April? Surely there are more dates in April than that. Well, no, not if what you're focusing on is Canadian trademark filings by LG Electronics. That's what's being represented here. Now, let's do something further interesting. First of all, I'm going to get rid of a few of those calendar years. The reason being that I do not want to overwhelm my server by what I am about to do. I'll just get rid of 2010 through, let's say, 2016. So now we've got 88 marks in total represented. Let's bring in from our document dimension the actual trademark application numbers so that we can have a look at those. Here's my document dimension. There it is. Here are the actual application numbers. So let's have a look at this one. Supposedly it was filed on the 7th of April, 2017, and supposedly its application serial number 1831777. Well, let's check it out. I'll right-click on it, and I'll go down here to Additional Actions, and you see I've got this Lookup Trademark at SIPO item. I'll just click that. My browser opens to SIPO's web page, to that application. You can see indeed it is LG Electronics out of South Korea. That's the application number, you'll recall, and recall the filing date, 7th of April, 2017. Now, we have been looking at a development version of my OLAP cube. Many of the measures and dimensions you saw me scroll by would be hidden in a production, that is, end-user version of the cube. It's easy to overwhelm cube users with too much detail. If a cube is not carefully designed, and if the cube's end users are not carefully trained in proper use of the cube, the door can be left open to enable users to unwittingly structure MDX queries that require inordinate amounts of processing time, effectively making the system unusable. Now, I've just scratched the surface with this cube, but I want to keep this short, and in any case, I think you've seen enough to understand that there are lots of ways in which you can use a cube to extract useful business intelligence from SIPO's richly detailed trademark XML data. In part 6 of this series, I'll demonstrate a report server for delivering reports incorporating information, including business intelligence, derived from the data warehouse. Feel free to email me if you have questions or comments.